Imagine waking up tomorrow to a world basically frozen by a single event. Greece and Turkey, two historic rivals sharing the exact same sea, are suddenly at the edge of open conflict. This isn't just some localized squabble, it's a geopolitical chain reaction just waiting to happen. The news is flashing across every screen, military aircraft are being tracked live, and you can bet every diplomat on Earth is in an absolute panic. So, what if Greece actually fights Turkey tomorrow? A conflict between these two wouldn't just stay between them. It would act as a spark that could literally set an entire region on fire. We're looking at severe, immediate consequences for NATO, the European Union, global energy routes, and, of course, the lives of millions. What happens when decades of tension, national pride, and regional power politics all just explode at once? Section 1. The spark of conflict and the deep historical memory behind it. You see, Greece and Turkey aren't distant strangers. They sit right at the crossroads where Europe meets Asia, and there is intense strategic competition there. If a conflict kicked off tomorrow, the first hours wouldn't happen in the shadows. Modern war starts with phone notifications and satellite tracking. Within hour 1, rumors and alerts trigger emergency meetings. By hour 6, you're seeing military readiness spike on both sides. Fast forward to hour 12, and border areas are on high alert. Air and naval movements are being watched by everyone, from top intelligence agencies to everyday people just scrolling on their phones. And within 24 hours, the public panic becomes incredibly real. Now, this emotional shock hits both societies differently. For Greece, the primary fear centers on their islands, their coastlines, airspace, and their national sovereignty being under direct threat. Meanwhile, over in Turkey, the perspective is heavily driven by national security, asserting regional power, and a really firm stance against feeling boxed in. But here's the thing. Once blood is spilled or territory is threatened, public opinion in both nations hardens fast. The narrative shifts entirely to national defense, and citizens demand strength. That makes diplomatic compromise almost impossibly difficult for any leader. It's the classic escalation ladder. Every war starts with leaders thinking, oh, we can manage this. But a limited clash rapidly steps up into full military mobilization. That mobilization can quickly turn into a naval blockade, which triggers armed retaliation, and suddenly you've engulfed the whole region in crisis. Military leaders face enormous pressure not to look weak, and the tragic irony, their preparations for defense are almost always misinterpreted by the other side as preparations for a larger war. Section 2. The NATO and EU crisis. Alliances under fire. Think about this for a second. Both Greece and Turkey are members of NATO. A war between them would tear a massive hole in the alliance's credibility. NATO was built to deter external threats, right? Not to manage two of its own member states attacking each other. This would throw the alliance into arguably one of the most humiliating crises in its history. The United States would likely be forced to step in immediately to play mediator, desperately trying to stop the bleeding and keep the whole security architecture from collapsing. And it's not just NATO. The European Union would be dragged into an immediate, chaotic scramble. Because Greece is an EU member, European leaders would be forced into emergency diplomacy. They'd be terrified of the shockwaves, disrupted migration policies, regional trade grinding to a halt, and severe threats to vital energy routes. The EU would be desperate to stop a fast-moving military crisis before it unravels broader stability with the Middle East. But let's be honest, the stark reality is that Europe often moves a lot slower than events on the ground. The Eastern Mediterranean itself becomes the stage where all this pressure builds up. It's a geography that creates constant friction. We're talking vital sea lanes, disputed islands, overlapping air corridors, and really complex conflicting energy interests. Even in peacetime, this region takes constant management. But in a crisis, it becomes an incredibly dangerous arena where heavily armed naval vessels and fighter jets track each other way too closely. It just produces endless opportunities for a simple misunderstanding to escalate instantly. Section 3. Economic and media shockwaves. Because modern conflict is never just military, is it? It instantly reaches into finance and supply chains. Financial markets would immediately face currency and bond uncertainty. Logistics networks would scramble. You'd see shipping routes delayed or totally rerouted, and insurance costs going through the roof. And for the tourism sector, an immediate collapse in Aegean travel. This makes the crises incredibly expensive from day one, even for countries and businesses thousands of miles away from the actual fighting. Alongside that economic shock, you have the modern battlefield of information. The media would turn this into a 24-hour global obsession. Every social platform would flood with propaganda, unverified rumors, and just pure online fear. In those first crucial hours, public emotion totally outruns factual verification. This narrative warfare actually makes the crisis far more dangerous because people, and sometimes even the policymakers themselves, start reacting to the version of events they see trending online rather than what's actually happening on the ground. And we really can't analyze this whole scenario without mentioning the Cyprus question. Any major Greek-Turkish confrontation would inevitably wake up the ghosts of this unresolved historical dispute. Even if the immediate fighting is happening somewhere else, Cyprus would hover over the entire crisis as this massive warning sign. It raises the terrifying prospect of a secondary flashpoint reopening, which could draw in broader regional actors and make the whole situation infinitely harder to contain. Section 4. The illusion of control and the true human cost. It's really easy to speak in these abstract terms about alliances and borders, but the human reality is entirely different. The immediate panic of ordinary people is stark. Imagine it: families frantically scrambling to call loved ones, schools closing immediately, businesses shutting their doors early, and emergency services being stretched incredibly thin as everyone rushes to stock up on essentials. People suddenly have to live inside the terrifying consequences of decisions they didn't make, entirely driven by fear before a single official evacuation order is even given. There's a quote that perfectly captures the absolute core of this danger. Once war starts, control becomes an illusion. Miscalculation is literally the most dangerous force in geopolitics. A first strike might be intended as just a limited message, but once casualties happen and public anger enters the picture, the logic entirely changes. What begins as a limited policy crisis rapidly morphs into an uncontrollable crisis of identity, where the reasons for ending the war actually become harder to explain to the public than the reasons for starting it in the first place. And then, think about the aftermath. Even if international mediators somehow manage to step in and halt the fighting quickly, the profound damage is already done. Trust is fundamentally broken. Military planners are going to assume future tension, investors will stay nervous, and citizens will harbor long-term resentment. Confidence in regional stability would be shattered for years. It just proves that the end of the fighting is never truly the end of the consequences. Ultimately, the scenario we've walked through in this explainer brings us to one haunting final thought. We rely on institutions like NATO and the EU to keep the peace. But if shared alliances cannot automatically erase old tensions between neighbors, how safe is our modern order, really? It is a stark reminder that we live in a world full of pressure points, where one mistake, one miscalculation, could trigger a massive, unplanned chain reaction that changes history overnight. Let that sink in.